Hi, I'm Stonewolf, and this is a picture of my Energica Ava Rebelle RS, which I've owned from new for exactly 1 year as of this video going live. I was going to do a 1 year retrospective, but I actually wanted to talk about range instead, so I'll do that once I've got a bit more time, maybe in January when I hit 10,000 miles. I also wanted to do this as a vlog, but it's been frosty and snowy out, so, you know. So the burning question you want to know the answer for is, how far does it go on 100% battery in the highway? And I'm not going to give it to you. Mainly because range in EVs is way more complex than that. My answer for how much the range is enough. It could certainly be better, but I don't feel it's really holding me back or getting in the way, and I actually think there are other aspects of the bike that need more urgent attention. And if you want to stick around, I'll explain all of that as best I can. As you were probably expecting me to say, it comes down to speed. Mostly. It doesn't necessarily mean what you think though. It's true that going from my VFR to my Rebelle, I slowed down somewhat, but to be honest, that needed to happen anyway. The Rebelle helped me learn a little restraint. It is however worth noting that, apart from motorway trips, my average speed hasn't actually gone down that much, which is where we get into the really interesting stuff. The reason for that is my cornering speeds haven't really changed much. The speeds that go when stuck behind someone haven't changed. The speeds that go through villages haven't changed. The sprints between corners have changed for sure, but not because they have to. If anything, the Energica is far more capable and also more tempting in that respect. The difference is me. I restrained myself mostly to an indicated 66 instead of the 70 or 80 I might have done in the VFR. You can see this in my videos. You're probably thinking that sounds like a buzzkill, and I'm not going to dispute that. You do lose a bit of the thrill. Depending on the road though, you might not be that much slower. And depending on what you're doing, you can maybe get away with a bit of a hoon if you're down for the risk. You see, what's going to matter is, 1, how long the sprint to the next corner is, and 2, how hard you pull on the way out, and how much you rely on the friction brakes on the way in. That's going to set your draw on the sprint, or an overtake. The corner itself is going to be more or less fixed for speed, unless you have a death wish. You're also not going to be going any faster than me in a village, unless you're a complete cunt, and your speed when stuck behind someone is fixed anyway, with only your overtake risk being a real factor there. So that in the end, whether you ride with an unchanged style or you use a little restraint, you won't end up that much slower on average unless the road is very open and either straight or gentle turns and has low traffic. Which is a convenient segue to motorways, and yeah, don't. Your range will be pretty bad at legal motorway speeds, never mind what you think is reasonable. Even if you keep to that 66 mph limit, you're not going to get the range because ex-urban means good country roads, not motorways. Consider what I said previously. There's nothing to slow you down, so you're going at a constant rate. They also tend to be more open, so if there's wind, you'll be fighting that too. Motorways are not your friend, and I'm going to make this even worse in a minute. Remember though that in the TLDR, I said the range was enough, so there's good news too. Something you may or may not be aware of is that the whole 100 to 0 top and tail measure of a battery is kinda meaningless. That's a whole conversation in and of itself, and I'm not fully qualified to have it, but basically for charge efficiency and contingency reasons, you want to keep the battery between 20 and 80%. This makes all the numbers a bit complex, but after you've been using a BEV for a while, you get used to it, even though it's kind of too confusing to bamboozle potential customers with, so you'll always be told the whole battery number. The simple version is you get 60% of your battery capacity to play with, even though sometimes you can get away with using more of it. That's not a hard limit. That's you looking at your battery display and saying, yep, I should go charge, just like you might do if your fuel gauge was getting low. So, if you're still following, I just made it way worse, right? Of course I did. If you've never taken an electric bike out for a longer ride, that's way off-putting. I know, I used to be you. But just like Neo trying to jump skyscrapers, I'm gonna have to ask you to free your mind for a moment. I didn't spend half the video talking about speed for nothing. You are going slower than you think. My average for Davos to Schlanders via Stelvio was something like 30 miles an hour over 75-ish miles. It was about 2.5 hours in the saddle. The average speed was actually slow enough that I got there with 10% more capacity than expected, despite all the luggage I was carrying, and the multiple ascents and descents over a kilometre vertically, and Stelvio was actually 2. It's not like I was being a slouch either. Those roads are just slow, and you have to ride the road, not your ego. This is pretty consistent with my experience. The footage you're watching is from a little circuit of Snowdonia. I was on the road for something like 4 hours, and although I did charge halfway in, I figured out after that I could have just skipped it. And this is one of those exceptions where you can use the whole battery. In fact, you might glimpse at a junction somewhere that I'm actually leading a handful of petrol bikes. Fun twisties and mountain roads will turn that 60% into 2 hours or even more. And I don't know about you, but I'm cool with taking a break at that point. Of course, that does depend on the charging network, and yeah, I know. I've had my fair share of charger issues, and some locations definitely have it worse than others, but mostly it's actually been good, and density and reliability are improving, in Europe at least. So clearly all of this works for me. You can probably see how I find the range to be enough. I'm actually pretty confident I could be more of a squid in the inter-corner sprints and not really reduce the range sufficiently for it to matter now. It could certainly be better, for sure. But it's enough. And the compromises for more capacity would be severely detrimental without significant technological change. I've even taken the bike on a 3,000 mile tour around Europe, so clearly it can manage more than just an afternoon fun run. But here is where we're going to get into the real not enough stuff and the other priorities I mentioned earlier. I mean, the good news is that I largely avoided motorways and just went out to find like good roads for most of my distance that I traveled, and in doing so I kind of like had a much more enjoyable time than if I'd missioned it on the motorway. And the real downsides of the bike didn't come into play so much. But translating that 60% rule onto the motorways means you're going to be really limited. You could do maybe an hour between charges if you set your speed right, less if you go faster, and, well, you won't really go slower than that if you can get away with it. So, of course, if you're going to be getting maybe 60 miles in an hour and then stopping for 40 minutes to charge, motorways stop making sense. And that's why I just avoid them and take the interesting roads anyway since I went electric. And that gets magnified when you realize that in order to get the big battery they use in the Rebelle, Energica took their smaller battery and replaced air cooling channels with more cells. The big battery has worse thermal management than the small one, and this really matters the most when it comes to charging. When you charge a battery, it gets hot. The hotter it gets, the more you have to throttle the charge rate to protect the battery. Between charges, you need to cool the battery down so that you can charge it again later. This means that if you charge the battery over and over without much time between charges, it gets hotter and hotter, so subsequent chargers become slower and slower. I can personally attest to this. Long motorway trips really suck for charging. This is largely because the battery is air-cooled with no fan. When it's charging, there's no cooling, and when it's moving, it just gets whatever cool air washes over it at speed. And of course, the big battery has less surface area for cooling. If I could just have the range I have now, but no thermal throttling, motorways would become more viable. Doubly so if the charge time was consistently lower in general, both of which would be possible with liquid cooling. Unfortunately, liquid cooling is bulky and heavy, which means it's simply not viable to implement. There are ways to tackle that, but they involve significant technological change that isn't going to be cheap or indeed likely to come to market in the short term, and that is where my priorities lie for improvements. This is the state of the art. It's as good as it gets for now. If motorway hauls are your thing, then either look elsewhere or be prepared to do what I did. But for everything else, this is good enough. I don't want to get into the whole solid state or different battery chemistries because those are vaporware today and will be for a while, and when they do come, they're going to displace the current state of the art, not suddenly appear at a lower price point. The current state of the art will become tomorrow's regular tech, though. When electric motorbikes come into reach of your budget, this is what you'll be getting, be it brand new or second hand. So there we are. I hope you understand what enough means now, and I don't know, maybe that's all you need to take EV bikes seriously. And incidentally, 10,000 miles later, I haven't noticed any reduction in range, so if price is the big factor, a second-hand Energica is worth a look if enough is good enough for you. Please do jump into the comments and tell me how wrong I am, or that I only like this bike because I'm boring or whatever. I could use a good laugh. If you found the video informative enough, though, maybe give it a like. Check out my other videos, consider subscribing and hitting that bell, and hey, maybe reward me for staying up late to write this and wasting my 40th birthday recording it by clicking the coffee link in the description below. Bye-bye.